Hi, I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, a podcast network that includes this show you're listening to, and also 12 other CityCasts in 12 other cities. And each one knows their city as well as your local team knows yours. So isn't it time we connected them? Don't you want to know how they're tackling their bike lane problems and housing challenges and sidewalk dog poop crises? That's why I'm hosting a new podcast called Your City Could Be Better. Because it could be. Every week, I'll chat with a different host in our CityCast network about what their cities are doing right and wrong, the weird things they're trying, and the surprising successes, so that we can all learn how to make our cities a little bit better. Listen to Your City Could Be Better on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Today on CityCast DC, it's one of the DMV's grisliest and weirdest crime stories in years. An 87-year-old millionaire shot to death inside a Potomac nursing home. When the news first broke, it understandably, it petrified residents of the Luxe assisted living facility. Now that there's been an arrest, and now that cops have laid out what looks like an elaborate, pre-planned scheme, there's a bigger question. Why? The Washington Post's Dan Morse has been covering the story. He's here to talk to us today. Today is Monday, March 9th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Dan, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It's nice to be here.
All right, so you have been all over this story that has been something of a local obsession, which is the nursing home murder in Potomac. Nearly 3 weeks ago, 87-year-old was shot to death in a nursing home. To start with, who was the person?
The gentleman who was shot is named Robert Fuller, goes by Bob. I just thought this was really interesting and telling. Everyone at this assisted care facility calls him the captain. The staff calls him the captain. And his friends back in Augusta, Maine, that's where he spent a lot of his life, they talk about how he was in the Navy Reserve, and he was a captain, and that was a big part of his life.
So he was a lawyer and a philanthropist in Maine, but he also wrote a murder mystery.
Yeah, I'm not sure he was as talented of a writer as he was an attorney. But, he was curious about so many things, and that led him to write this crime novel. It's called Unnatural Deaths. When I was trying to put together the story, it's not super available on Amazon. One of his friends in Augusta was nice enough to Federal Express me a copy so that I could use that in my story.
Okay, so this happened at like 7-something in the morning. And, it occurs to me, guns are loud. Did nobody hear this?
No one did, as far as I know. And there's an interesting detail that the captain had a roommate. She stayed in a different room. And she hears things. She's not a super sound sleeper. And the suspect, Marquise, his job there is to deliver the medication to all the residents. He's called a med tech. And both these two people in this residence got oxycodone at night. And after this happened, his roommate talked to the investigators, and she said that she knew him as Marquese. And Marquese would come by, very friendly, nice guy, give them their medicine. On this night, he came back later when he gave the captain his medicine, and she also spoke to her. And he asked her, do you feel the medication kicking in? And that struck her as odd. He never asked her that. And one of the theories of the detectives is that he wanted her to be, really asleep and really knocked out when he returned to the apartment to do this.
Oh my God, this is more televisual than I imagined. This roommate, was this a romantic situation, or did they just share quarters?
They just shared quarters. I don't quite know about that. They did know each other for a long time, going back to Augusta. He moved here and then she moved there. I think she was his longtime assistant. We know that much, sort of professional assistant. And his job as an attorney, after he retired and he was a philanthropist, that was almost a full-time job. He had a lot of money. and he liked giving it away.
So at first, the police didn't release the names of any suspects. All we knew was that there had been a shooting death of an elderly resident of an assisted living facility. I imagine this freaked out the other residents of the assisted living facility.
It did, and this facility put out some internal communications of, this is, you're safe, we're taking this seriously, and, there's no ongoing threat.
Did the police have this suspect from the beginning, even if they weren't saying?
I don't think they did. Certainly they weren't saying anything. And then, when they filed their arrest warrant, you go back and you read it, and I talked to some sources, right away they talked to this guy. But they talked to all the staff who were on duty at that time. And, the guy came across as hopeful. He drove down from Baltimore on his day off. And he did say, sort of volunteered, like, I would never hurt him. He was definitely on our radar based on what the roommate said, that this weird thing where he came back in and said, is it kicking in? But there was really nothing to go on other than that. They did see this video pretty early on, but the video was of a person walking through the courtyard who had a wig. They didn't know if it was a wig, very long hair. Some people actually thought it was a woman. And then they did see the camera from the front, and the person had a mask on. So it was alarming. It was about the time the captain was shot, but it didn't tell them who it was.
Before we get into the arrest, tell me about this assisted living facility. Is this, I imagine, this is a very wealthy individual. This is a creme de la creme kind of situation.
Yes, it's very nice. Different floors. He lived on the third floor, which was assisted living. There is a memory care floor on the first floor. He was up in assisted living. He could get around. He had a wheelchair, but he wasn't in memory care. His place was real big. It was not only in a very nice Potomac facility, but it was a big one, enough for two people. He had lived somewhere earlier. He was in Maine, moved down.
Why did he come to D.C.?
His wife became ill and had memory issues. Wife has a daughter who lives in the area. So I think, to care for her, to be near family, they both moved down here.
Is the wife still alive?
No, the wife passed away in 2023.
So then we flash forward by about a week, and there is a traffic stop in Baltimore. What happens?
Well, it was really scary for the troopers. You think of Maryland State Troopers out in the countryside, right? But they actually patrolled Baltimore, and there was a trooper in Baltimore who saw two cars speeding. And then the second car didn't have working headlights, hit the flashers. That car stopped at a traffic light, at an intersection, but appeared to be stopping. So the trooper got out of the car and was walking up to this car. And, it kind of played out like a nightmare for a cop. He's walking up and the windows are very tinted. It's Baltimore in the middle of the night. And he gets close and all of a sudden the door cracks open. And you can see, because they released an image from the body camera, that, the driver literally turns around, the door is open just a few inches, and he shoots him through the crack in the door. And the trooper was so close that he got burned from the powder burns on his face. The muzzle came out, but the two bullets whizzed right by his head. He's incredibly lucky to be alive. So the guy drives off.
So it's not like they were looking for this person because of the murder of the captain.
Not at all. And it was so random that they didn't know about it. And so the Montgomery County detectives come in the next morning, the guys working on the case, and there's a bolo, be on the lookout, out of Baltimore police for, this very dramatic shooting that one of the homicide investigators just started reading. I don't know if he certainly wouldn't have read it for the case. Maybe he would have, but as a cop, he's drawn to the fact that a trooper was almost killed. And he reads and he sees a description of the vehicle, and he knows that's one of Marquise's cars.
So they knew enough about Marquise at this point. I mean, they were at least thinking of him as a possible suspect.
There were things actually that happened about 36 hours before, like bam, 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 where just on their own, Marquise was the guy they wanted. And then this happens, and, as part of the bolo that went out, it was a little snippet of the body cam. And so the detectives looked at that, and, they could see like his face. Not very clear, but looked like him. So they start, not at that point, the state police were looking for this car. But now Montgomery County gets involved, calls the troopers and say, hey, we we think we know who this guy is, which, allowed them to put him under surveillance. And they were sort of waiting for a time to arrest him. They try to be careful. They try to pick the right place to do it. Obviously this is a pretty dangerous person. So
where'd they do it?
He had, they were following him. They were looking for the best place to do it. And they actually knew he had traffic court, but it's not like they did the traffic court in downtown Rockville.
I mean, just for some random ticket or something.
Correct. They didn't want to do it there. They didn't put a stake out. Downtown Rockville's kind of, it's people walking around. But it just happened that they followed him in there and they decided to do it. And it was a dramatic takedown. He ran, and they tackled him. They saw a bunch of bullets on the floor of his car. It was every bit of, I don't know this, I wasn't there, but it sounds like it was every bit of a very aggressive arrest.
You're the police reporter here, but it seems to me if you shoot at a cop, you should probably clean the bullets off the floor of your car.
That's right. And
it's traditional.
Right. And you maybe take this as a court appearance not to appear at. Right. He did a number of things.
He couldn't not appear. That would be illegal.
That's right. He would have broken the law. There were a number of things that he did that didn't really make sense.
Catch world-class arts in DC this spring for free. The Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University presents the Peabody Performance Series, a full season of free concerts at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center, located at 555 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. The Peabody Performance Series brings the artistry and innovation of one of the nation's leading conservatories to the heart of DC, with concerts and programs spanning jazz, classical music, and dance. On March 24th, experience the Dance Showcase featuring contemporary choreography by Peabody faculty and alumni. On April 10th, the first of the Slang Lecture Series examines spirituals as the cultural bedrock of the American sound, led by distinguished visiting faculty artist Darren Atwater. Hear the Baltimore Jazz Collective's original compositions, arrangements, and swinging improvisations on April 17th. On May 1st, pianist Stephen Spooner presents Aspects of Liszt. And on May 8th, the season concludes with a performance by the Peabody Jazz Ensemble. While all events are free, tickets are required for entry. Learn more and get your tickets at washingtondc.jhu.edu.
Don't miss Folger Theaters As You Like It, playing March 10th through April 12th at the Folger Shakespeare Library. Envisioned by artistic director Karen Ann Daniels and directed by Timothy Douglas, this production of Shakespeare's comedy offers a love note to DC, imbuing the Forest of Arden with the familiar vibes, culture, and characters that mark the district as a resilient and redemptive place of belonging. Featuring choreography from Tony Thomas, a Folger Theaters Helen Hayes award-winning production of Metamorphoses, and original music by Grammy Award nominee Kokiai. Don't miss this take on Shakespeare's playful and musical comedy.
Okay, so they arrest him. What had happened 36 hours before the Baltimore shooting that made them look for Marquise?
Right. So they had looked at video. Early on, they knew it gets a little hard to follow, but the video of the person with the long hair and the mask, the video showed that person going into this outdoor doorway into the facility. And they were able to learn pretty early on that lock had been messed around with. Like in that hallway after the murder, they found a paper towel that had like folds in it, and the folds matched the door frame. And they thought, because they knew that going in and out of that door hadn't set off an alarm, they didn't think it was propped open, but what they came to think was that someone had put this paper, you know how you can sort of put paper between the lock so there's no sensor going on. So they kind of thought that early on, but part of that maybe was someone inside the facility had done this. They didn't know if someone in the facility was working with someone outside the facility, but they had in their mind that like that lock had been tampered with.
And had Marquise been back to work since the killing?
Yes.
So he just showed up like a regular employee coming to work.
Yeah. They eventually figured out when the lock was tampered with. Okay, so the murder happens on February 14th. Then they eventually figure out that that lock had been tampered with on January 9th. And that's when sort of the sensor stopped. And like I was curious, like, why didn't that set off alarm bells in the facility? And maybe it should have, but this was a door that really wasn't used. It was like a back door into a stairwell. It's just one of these doors in a building that's not used. But they eventually got video interior on that day. And they looking at it, and they figure out, they don't know when they don't have video of anyone tampering with a lock, but they have Marquise in that stairwell on that day. And that would be a Saturday, think in terms of the week. And that really piqued their interest. And then Yosette really made a turn of like, okay, this isn't just the strange med tech guy. This is a guy who we now know, or we now think, was messing around with a lock like 5 weeks before. And then the next day, a tipster walks into the police department and says, I know about this. And it was...
What does he say?
I think the way to describe it is it made them think that Marquise did this, but they were still unsure if they had, what kind of case they had. On a Friday, the police released that video of the person walking through the courtyard with long hair in the back. They didn't release the mask part. Didn't think that would help. It might have just freaked people out, but they released the back part. And so the tipster comes in and says, I don't work there, but I know people who work there. And they say when they saw that video, that this weird jacket shirt that was in the video, it's kind of unique, like yellowish with big checkered things. Employees tell tipster there's someone at this place who wears a jacket like that and also has a weird gait. When the police released the video, they instructed people to look at how this person is walking. And the person did have an unusual, almost like limp. And so the tipster said, well, they also recognize that as a weird walk that this employee does. The tipster did say, don't know the last name of this person, but the last name is the same as someone who works there. And so they went through a list of employees and they saw Marquise's last name. So now the third thing that happens, which really got them super nervous, was early Monday morning, they get an urgent call. One of the detectives gets what they described as an urgent call from the facility that Marquise at like 1 a.m. is there and he's just walking around in places he shouldn't be, and they're super nervous and they call the detective about this. And so the detectives go down there that night and they start looking around. And I can go back and tell you what the employee said and then what the detectives found. And after all that, they were really sure. They didn't quite get their arrest warrant, but they were really locking on him at that point.
So the big question that everyone, I think, has is why?
They still don't know. If you go back to the tampering of the lock on January 9th, there's, don't know this for sure, but you can kind of think that he was maybe planning this for 5 weeks.
But was he planning to do it to the captain or to anyone there?
Could have been anyone.
Is there any evidence that he's gotten money from them or gotten something?
No, there's nothing like bad blood between him and the captain. There was nothing stolen. They're still looking at that, if these two had some kind of, I don't know, bad blood, money, financial.
Did the captain, as far as we know, have any enemies in Maine? Or, I mean, could it be something from a previous life?
No, there's nothing like that. I mean, he could have a strong personality, but nothing at all like that, and nothing with his family. I mean, something like this happens. I think the investigators, particularly at someone at that age, might look at who's in the will and who might be getting money. And there was nothing like that. There was no squirrely, descendants to look at. You're kind of left with perhaps this is a homicide that doesn't have a reason. And so who does that? It's someone who just wants to kill someone, which is really scary. There was another video they found on that weekend when they were looking at videos. So it's now January 26th, kind of in the midway point here. They see video from January 26th, which is maybe 3 weeks before the murder. And it's video of the outside of the place. And there's Marquise at 1:40 in the morning walking around in the snow. And his shift ends at 11. So it makes no sense, And that was another thing that happened over that weekend that really got them interested in this guy. They're thinking, is he trying to figure out how to get back in the building to do something like this? The captain's room was on the 3rd floor. You wouldn't want to go into so sad about all these things, but you wouldn't want to go onto the memory care floor because those are locked, right? But it could get into the assisted living floor where those, I don't know if the captain's room was unlocked, but it may certainly have been. That's very common in assisted living.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever covered a case like this?
No, I haven't. But, Montgomery County is a pretty good place to cover murders because you never know what weird one is around the corner for some reason. I had a colleague of mine who covers murders in D.C., where there are a lot more, told me that I was lucky because he said pound for pound, Montgomery County has the best murders, which is a thing that only a reporter would say,
What happens now? I assume that if they bring this to a trial, they're going to have some kind of theory of the case.
I think a defense attorney would, at this point, would say, you don't have him in the room. You don't have a witness to him doing this. I will say this, though. If I was a defense attorney and I got this case and I saw this fact, I would say, as some defense attorneys say, that's a bad fact. The shooting of the trooper, there was a shell casing. They found at least one of them on the road. And they found a shell casing in Fuller's room at the assisted facility. And those two shell casings matched, meaning they came from the same gun. Now, some of that ballistics evidence is not as good as, it's been kind of disproved lately. It's going to be hard to say if they found his gun. I don't know if they haven't. It's going to be hard to say this shell casing came from this gun. But one of the things they can say is that, these two shell casings look like they came from the same gun. And so it's pretty definite that that shell casing was fired by Marquise in Baltimore. And then you got a matching shell casing in the room of a murder victim where he worked. So that's not good for him. So
before I let you go, because I know you're going to keep covering this, what's the mood like at the assisted living now? Because presumably if you're paying a lot of money to live in assisted living, you're going to expect that the assisted living is going to vet their employees for not being alleged murderers.
Right. I've heard it's not great. I've heard some people are looking to move out. So I hope to find out a little bit more of what they feel. I'm sure what the family members of people who live there, most people, a lot of people have been through moving their parents to a place like this, and you just are on pins and needles of how that place is treating your parents. So I imagine they have heard from some families.
Well, Dan, I hope you will keep us posted as the story evolves. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to talk to you, Mike.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city.